Hi, it falls to me on behalf of the Society of Musculoskeletal Medicine to welcome Karen Middleton to this chat that we're going to have. Karen is the Chief Executive Officer of the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy and soon to be retiring. And coincidentally, she's also the President of the Society, hereafter we'll call SOMM, and is retiring from that role as well. So I thought I would probably be the one who'll look back on things. My name's Elaine Atkins, and I've been a member of the Society for many, many years and am past chair. And then it'll be for Johnny Smith, who is the chair of education for SOMM, who'll perhaps turn and look a little bit more towards the future. So, Karen, you and I go back an awful long way. Which I'm sure you'll sort of reflect on in a moment. But it was interesting when I was speaking to Johnny at the start of this, to the process to get this meeting together, that he didn't realize at all that you had been a fellow of the Society all of those years ago, and that you were very involved and still are involved with the Society. And I thought, well, perhaps people listening into this will also want to know a little bit about your past in terms of your relationship with SOMM, and it would be really interesting to hear.
Yes, thanks, Elaine. I was reflecting this morning on my involvement with SOMM, which was the Society of Orthopaedic Medicine when I started, and I worked out that I did my first course, upper limb course, in 1986, and I really wanted to share actually that if it hadn't been for SOMM, I wouldn't have gone into MSK at all. It completely terrified me as a student. I really didn't understand what I was meant to be doing, how to examine, how to assess. And I can really remember finishing that first upper limb course with Stephanie Saunders and Liz Edwards. And suddenly just being able to get it. And it was such an eye-opener to me in terms of actually trying to diagnose what was wrong as opposed to trying to just treat a load of symptoms. It was also, it just gave me a framework for examining a patient. And I mean, I just went on from strength to strength because I just loved it. I loved the subject matter. I loved the way that SOMM taught. And I loved the fact that I was training with doctors as well. Again, people probably don't realise now, but certainly when I trained, I mean, you really didn't have much to do with the medical profession. You shouldn't have had much to do with the medical profession. So it was really great to learn with doctors and to really develop a mutual respect between us. So for me, SOMM gave me the sort of way in to musculoskeletal medicine. If it hadn't been for that, that wouldn't have been the area that I would have specialised in and spent most of my clinical career in. And then I passed all the modules. I think it was 3 then in 1990, which was when I met you and Monica, because you, Elaine, and Monica Kesson were doing your fellowship exams, I think, at the time. And that's when I thought, you know, maybe that was something that I could do in the future. And that was grueling, actually, those fellowship exams. I mean, I'm sure they're no different now. I wouldn't know. Maybe they're even worse now. But honest to God, I don't think I've ever done anything so terrifying in my life. And Liz Edwards, I mean, as much as I hugely respected her, and she was an incredibly kind lady, she was equally terrifying. And I mean, I will never forget those essays and that work to get those fellowship exams. So anybody who's a fellow of SOMM, I know what you've been through and how hard that was. And then I was able in 94, 95 to start teaching. And I mean, it was just such a gift for me to be able to combine my clinical work with a love of teaching and working with some great personalities, and I say personalities as much as anything else, because if I look back on my time with SOMM, it's the people that I remember more than anything. And so yeah, then I think I got roped into being on council as much as anything else. And actually that was a really interesting period, because and towards the end in particular of my time on council, because that was when it really felt to me, particularly down to you, Elaine, the professionalisation of SOMM took place. And I can remember, for some unknown reason, being in Watford interviewing for the first sort of manager type post to sort of manage the society, and you know, it felt like it was going from, you know, a group of people who were trying to do their best on a part-time basis on top of day jobs into something much more professional. And I mean, it's barely recognisable now from where it was then, I have to say. And it's been a real privilege to be sort of still around in the background to see, and also how SOMM and the courses have worked really very much in not so much partnership, but have really resonated with the drive for physiotherapy and the profession to really take up its autonomy as a profession, and, you know, to work in primary care, the whole first contact practitioner work. It's just really gone hand in hand with the training that is provided by SOMM. So sort of looking back, there's something for me about the way physio has gone, the way my career has gone, and the way SOMM has gone, that's all been sort of working in parallel. So it's been a privilege and an absolute pleasure. Yeah.
Oh, it's so lovely to hear. I mean, a couple of things there, because I noticed in your profile, of course, you were the first female CEO and also the first physio to be a CEO. And that's where there's a synchronicity as well, because you were also the first female president we've had and the first physio. So, you know, well done for being such a trailblazer. Now, you and I talked together for quite a long time, didn't we? And
yes.
I think before we go too far into the rest of your amazing career, it might be nice just to reflect on your teaching career with SOMM. And maybe you've got a couple of stories or anecdotes that you're able to share. And it would be really nice to hear them.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you know, in doing the teaching, what I remember is it was really hard work. I mean, it was hard work. But in particular, I mean, at the time, it was largely you, Elaine, and Monica that was sort of leading it and developing it. So the work was much harder for you, and really the teachers and the fellows, we were just having to deliver it. But it was hard work, and it did keep you on your toes. But also we had some fun. And I mean, a couple of the times I can particularly remember, first of all, one of the fellows that I seemed to do a lot of teaching with was Ian Davis, who introduced me to Tattinger champagne, which remains my favourite drink. And of course, this was his own personal money, I should stress, buying the champagne. But it seemed to me that when I got my schedule, if I was ever allocated to be with Ian, I sort of thought, great, we at least know the champers will be on ice. And also he allowed me to drive his Ferrari home from one of the courses, which I will never forget, that he just let me get in his car and drive it, which was just a first for me. I also remember the training program that Graham and I did, and Elaine, you were training with us, and Graham was doing a manipulation or a mobilization on my neck, and I was the model. And to this day, it makes me giggle when I think of it. And I looked up at Graham and I started giggling, and Graham started giggling, and it was absolutely horrendous, because Elaine, quite rightly, was telling us to, you know, stop it and get on and be professional. And of course, the more serious Elaine got, the more hysterical I got. And then Elaine asked us to have a break. So we broke for tea and went off and had to get this out of our system. And then as soon as I lay down on that bloody couch and Graham looked over me, the whole thing started again. And it was hopeless. And of course, Elaine was getting more and more hopeless. I remember that so well. So, I mean, there's so many different stories like that, but it was just... it was meeting new people all the time. We had some cracking students, we had some hopeless students, but we had a great time as well as doing some really, really good work. So I just remember it being hard work, but fun as well. Really good fun.
And I remember that you were so efficient even then, you know, and really got things done in record time. And we were teaching together in Belfast, I think, and you were always amazing at clearing up after the course when I was sort of dithering and so on. And there was one time when you sort of stole the department's spine and managed to sort of wedge it into the suitcase with all the rest of the bones. And of course, we just sort of disappeared with it. And I had to apologize that we'd sort of stolen one of their sort of teaching resources. But you're absolutely right. It really was fun. And so sort of coming back then, to your amazing career, I think it would be lovely if you could reflect on what happened next and where you went when you sort of parted from SOMM, not with any rancor, but you moved on, and we all sort of doing that.
Yeah, so I went to the Department of Health, which was like landing on Mars, frankly. For anybody who's ever worked in the civil service, they will know what I mean. I was probably not cut out for the civil service. I can remember having to sign the Official Secrets Act and also being signing that I was happy to work in any department that they put me, which, you know, I sort of wondered how on earth I'd get on in the Foreign Office or somewhere like that, but hey. But I really, really enjoyed working in health policy. I found it really stimulating, surrounded by really brainy people, but trying to always hold in mind patients and what the public needed. You know, I always used all my physio skills, analysing, using data, communication, problem solving every day. And I think the thing that I was proudest of, well, two things at the Department of Health over the years that I was there, was really pushing forward on the self-referral agenda. You know, for me, again, it comes back to SOMM, you know, realising that actually, albeit physiotherapists have had clinical autonomy since 1977, you know, unless you went privately, really, then you weren't able to access a physio without seeing a doctor first. And with all due respect to my medical colleagues, many times I worked clinically with my medical colleagues and I was telling them what to do, where to inject and what, you know, and it just seemed madness to me that we actually have this autonomy and couldn't use it. So pushing on the whole self-referral agenda, which obviously later, when I came to the CSP, translated into first contact physio. But secondly, and probably my biggest sort of achievement personally was gaining independent prescribing for physiotherapists, which we're still the only country in the world where that happens. And, you know, it was the most terrifying process to have to go through. It took forever. But all the time hanging on to the fact that this was the right thing for patients and the right thing for the profession. And I knew that the profession could do it. And it's been really interesting, you know, over this year, I heard about in the Northeast, some physios who, as a result of the fact they're independent prescribers, they're paediatric physios, and their children that they're treating with cystic fibrosis, they now don't have to take out of school in order for the children to have to go and have the medication sorted out, because the physios can do it in the schools because they've got independent prescribing rights. So it's just great to hear those stories that originated actually getting that legislation changed. So that was me at the Department of Health, and then in 2014 I came to the CSP. Again, not a sort of a post that I ever thought I would go for. I had a love-hate relationship with the CSP, if I'm honest, and but like most of the jobs that I've had in my life, I've always thought, well, rather than keep banging on about how awful so-and-so's doing it or that organisation is, try and have a go and get inside and see if I can help at all. So yeah, it was a job which has been quite challenging over the 10 years, but on the whole, I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, it's amazing. I think within there, you've sort of identified what you would believe would be your legacy, or what you would want your legacy to be. I don't know if you've got anything to add along those lines there.
I think within the CSP, and about specifically physio, because when I was at the Department of Health, it was all 12 of the allied health professions. But sort of coming back to physiotherapy at the end of my career, or the last 10 years, I think I would like to think that the profession has really illustrated what it can do in terms of its breadth. So I think if you look at what happened in COVID, the COVID pandemic, for example, the recognition that physiotherapy got in terms of rehabilitation more broadly, I think the MSK end of physiotherapy was pretty well known anyway by the public, but I think understanding physiotherapy more broadly has certainly been one of my drivers. I would like my legacy, but I don't think I'm there yet, really, to have been about really getting politicians and decision makers to understand the value of rehabilitation. The phrase I've always used is that it's not just about adding years to life. It's also about adding life to years. And for me, that's the difference that physio brings, enabling people to live their very best life. And I think we're just on a tipping point in terms of that. I think more recently, over the last 2 or 3 years, the whole equity, diversity and inclusion agenda, and really trying to open the profession up to feel more inclusive to people with both protected characteristics and just different people. I think, you know, when I started out in physio, the profession was very white, very female. It probably is still predominantly, but I think it's changing, and I want people, whoever they are, wherever they're from, to feel like they belong to this profession, because I think it's the most fabulous profession. I really do, and I think it can make a huge difference to people's lives and their everyday life. So yeah, those are some of the things that I'm particularly proud of. Whether there'll be a legacy or not will be for others to say, I think. Elaine, you're on mute.
Oh, don't you just hate being told that? I clicked it too. Anyway, thank you very much. And I was saying, miming, perhaps we can hand over to Johnny now, because he's got another slant to bring to this conversation. Johnny, do you want to take over?
Well, I've been thoroughly enjoying listening to these stories, and I think as maybe a newer teaching fellow, we need to up our game with some more stories to be able to tell us. And that's hilarious. I think you may have answered partly already, Karen, but I guess if you were a physio early in your career, you know, why would you encourage them maybe to do a SOMM diploma, the foundation course? I think you did say a few points, but I guess to kind of.
Because I think that what, particularly now, pre-registration training for physios, you're less likely now to go specialty to specialty to specialty like we did, and there's advantages to that, which I could come on to. But I think what the diploma sort of program course does is absolutely hone your skills in MSK and your thinking, and particularly around the diagnostics, and you know, the wonderful change that I've seen is how evidence-based it is now. Again, an awful lot down to Elaine and others who've really made sure that the work of SOMM has progressed as evidence has become clear and research has become available. But I think the diploma really gives you a grounded framework and confidence, real confidence in being able to sort of have that patient in front of you and assess and diagnose in a really organized, systematic way. Which was, I mean, Elaine talks about my organisation and efficiency. You know, I needed that when I qualified, and SOMM gave me that. Ah,
Johnny's frozen.
here he is. He's back.
All right.
Oh, there we go.
I seem to freeze.
Are you back, Johnny? Do you want to?
I'm back. Yeah, sorry. I think I just lost that last little bit, but yeah, I think it's fascinating really, because what you just said there, Karen, is what the current tutors are saying exactly the same thing. So whilst the courses have evolved and we've just got that 5th edition of the textbook out, and it's always changing in light of evidence, I think the fundamental principles of what people get are exactly what you've said. So it's refreshing to hear the same thing, really.
That's great, isn't it? Because it shows how the organisation has evolved, but the sort of grounding principles are still there, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, looking at staff training possibly, I mean, do you think maybe current pressures in the NHS are possibly having a negative impact on the clinical development of staff? Is that something you would feel, or is that not fair to say, would you think?
I mean, I think the current pressures in the NHS are having such a horrendous pressure on everyone. I mean, not just physios, but our medical colleagues and others. I mean, you know, I was working in the health service in the late 80s when waiting lists were something else. But now it's not just waiting lists being long for all the reasons that we know, but morale is so low as well. And I'm not sure that we're going to come out of it very soon. That's the problem. I think, though, that still provides a massive opportunity for our profession, because we are a profession of really good value, and I say good value rather than cheap. But I mean, when you look at how long it takes to train us versus some other clinicians, we're very good value. Then you add in something like the postgraduate training of SOMM, and then you have not only an autonomous clinician, but you have somebody who's an expert in MSK, which, you know, from a primary care perspective is a huge asset to have. I mean, if you look at the first contact physio or first contact practitioner work and how it evaluates so well from a clinical perspective, you know, because you're using your autonomy as is intended, from a practice perspective and a patient perspective, you know, and the system at large. So I think, albeit times are tough, you know, I've always said never let a good crisis go to waste. And I think it just means that we can really show off the skills and expertise and our efficiency that we bring.
No, thank you. I think also that leads into what I was going to ask next, really. I mean, there's been so many amazing changes, as you mentioned, the first contact practice, the advanced practice, independent prescribing. I mean, looking to the future, what do you think the future holds for the MSK practitioner? Are there some key points possibly from MSK NHS agenda? You know, it'd just be really interesting. We have you here to get your input It's the future.
Yeah.
Really.
So I don't know whether you saw the Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty's report out last week, but I would urge SOMM and all practitioners to get hold of that report. It's a pretty easy read, and there's an exec summary. But what it's essentially saying, and it's almost addressed to the medical profession, but it could be our profession. You know, it's all very well having specialists, advanced practitioners, etc., but actually the demographics of the population is multimorbidity, comorbidity. And so my message for the future, really, whether it's MSK or any other specialty, is how do you marry being an expert in that clinical area with the fact that your patients are walking through the door not just with an MSK problem, but with multiple other problems, and it will only get more complex going forward. So I think the real trick for any profession is to pull off the balance between specialists and generalists. And I think that is, I mean, I think that that's something for the profession, but I also think it's something for SOMM to think about. Because if you become over-focused on just being specialists, then, you know, there's a whole demographic of the population that you're not going to be able to serve. So how do you do that? You know, is there training that's about people becoming more and more expert, as well as some training which is actually to enable the generalists to be able to work and call upon those specialists as and when needed? So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing alludes to what you were saying earlier, Johnny, which is around, you know, the situation, particularly in the NHS, but it's also the independent sector as well, where demand is way outstripping supply. And how do you provide a service in that context? And so I think it's got to be about not just the hands-on, but what do you do to enable self-management and feel that that is part of your treatment? So I think finding capacity within the patient, within groups, within communities to manage their conditions, as well as requiring or needing that hands-on treatment, I think is absolutely critical. I don't think the need for expertise and first contact physio, for example, is going to go away, but I think it's going to get more and more complex. And if you read the CMO's report, I mean, it's absolutely, it just nails it in terms of what the future of healthcare needs to look like. And, you know, it's not going to go away, basically.
That's brilliant. I think that gives us a really nice summary and good insight from SOMM with our education committee. And, you know, we've made changes within the foundation course, adding in newer lectures on, you know, the importance of comorbidities and lifestyle factors, and social prescribing and all sorts of other things to help, I think, provide the needs of this demographic of patients we've got. So yeah, I do need to check that out. I've hands up, I've not read it yet, so thank you.
No, I mean, it only came out last Thursday, so you can forgive yourself from that. And I'm just, you know, policy wonk that I read that sort of thing quickly. And also the CSP inputted to it for the first ever time. So that's a big milestone. But I just think it's sort of a call to the nation, really. And it's bigger than health, really. You know, so what does that mean for society? What does that mean for housing and all the other issues? But I think, you know, if you know, we started by looking back, but if you look at how SOMM has evolved in its training and teaching, you know, I think that's the sort of next evolution. But it sounds like you're already on that path. So, you know.
That's brilliant. Elaine, shall I hand back to you? I think I've asked a lot of my questions there.
Yes, I mean, how interesting it's been. I don't know if there's anything else that's popped into your head, Karen, that you would want to say.
Well, I think a big thank you, really, a really big thank you, because I mean, an awful lot of what's been achieved, particularly around first contact physio, for example, has been achieved in partnership with SOMM. The MSK Advanced Practice Standards in partnership with SOMM. And I think if you think about all the training and all, I mean, God knows how many physios have been trained over the years. But, you know, I come back to how I felt right at the beginning when I first did the diploma, and that confidence that you get. I think, you know, it is a big thank you, because also all of the fellows that are teaching, you know, it is on top of the day job. And, you know, it's a lot of work, never mind those of you who are involved in the committees and council and all of that. So a big thank you, and you know, a personal thank you from me around my career, because it would never have gone in the direction it went if it hadn't been for SOMM and you know, those first few sessions at St Thomas's Hospital, which you know, I look back on fondly. I really do. So yeah, it's a big thank you from me.
Well, funnily enough, I was going to give a big thank you to you. I feel a bit like Simon Cowell, but I knew all those years ago that you were going to go far. And so you have. We've been so lucky to have you at the Department of Health, so lucky to have you at the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy, and so lucky to have you as our president. So it really is on behalf of all of the generations of SOMM since you and I were together, and before that, you know. Thank you very much. And
thank you.
We want to wish you all the best for your retirement. Oh, you've deserved it so much. And thank you so much for joining us today too. Thanks.
Thanks, Elaine and Johnny.
Okay.
Thank you, Karen.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.